China is just re-agreeing to what it agreed to a month ago. And frankly, the US gave more to get China to agree to what it agreed to. And for the first time, the US put relaxation of export controls on the negotiating table with China, opening the door for export controls now to be a negotiating request for China in future negotiations, which is only going to make talks more complicated going forward.
President Donald Trump has said a trade deal has been agreed between China and the United States after hours of intense talks in London. The deal removes Chinese export restrictions on rare earth minerals and allows Chinese students access to American universities. The two countries agreed to a truce back in May after a rapid escalation of tariffs nearly paralysed trade between the world's two largest economies. Well, joining us now is Wendy Cutler, Vice President of the Asia Society Policy Institute and a former diplomat. Wendy Cutler, welcome to you.
Thank you.
I wonder, can you just give us a little basic summary of what's happened with this trade deal between the US and China?
Sure. Look, this is a welcome development. It de-escalates tensions between the US and China, but it by no means guarantees that we're on a path towards cooperation. This deal basically gets us back to where we were a month ago in Geneva when the two sides agreed to lift tariffs and also to lift so-called non-tariff measures by China. And China slow walked the issuance of licenses for critical minerals and magnet exports, leading the United States to claim foul and therefore to get back together in London to strike a new deal to kind of get us back to where we were in Geneva.
But do we know anything more about the tariffs? Because we're on a 90-day pause at the moment, aren't we? Back in May, that pause was agreed after tariffs had reached, 145% on the US and 125% on China. Now it's back down to a relative 30% and 10%, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And there's only 90 days, which will take us to the first half of August with China. We've now spent a month just relitigating what we already agreed to, losing precious time to address the real issues of concern, including excess capacity, unfair trade practices, fentanyl, and the list goes on and on. So huge challenges for the negotiators going forward.
So, basically, if we're looking for something on tariffs, we don't look here for the moment. But there are other moments that perhaps we can say, well, look, there's a slight move forward if you've got a movement on rare earth minerals and access for Chinese students.
Correct. And again, both sides did reach an accommodation. But again, China is just re-agreeing to what it agreed to a month ago. And frankly, the US gave more to get China to agree to what it agreed to. And for the first time, the US put relaxation of export controls on the negotiating table with China, opening the door for export controls now to be a negotiating request for China in future negotiations, which is only going to make talks more complicated going forward.
Do you think there is any appetite from Donald Trump to make some sort of grand gesture towards China?
Absolutely. I think there's part of Donald Trump that would love to do the deal that no one else could ever do with China. But easier said than done. And again, there's so many bumps in the road that I think the prospects of reaching a big deal and a groundbreaking deal with China is really out of reach. And what makes more sense is to work in an incremental way and build confidence and trust between the two sides and deal with immediate irritants and issues of concern.
Well, Wendy, it's interesting. We've just been talking about a story that's breaking here in some of our papers, suggesting that the Pentagon is now reviewing a deal that it did with the UK and Australia to build submarines because there is scepticism in the States about whether the United States should help Australia obtain submarines unless there's a commitment from them to be used in any war with China, the Pentagon says it's reviewing this AUKUS deal, as it's called, to ensure, quotes, this initiative of the previous administration is aligned with the president's America First agenda. So all sort of caused really by concerns about heightened tensions with China.
Yeah, I mean, look, the administration is reviewing a lot of the policies and agreements that were pursued by the Biden administration. And I would hope that the review of the AUKUS agreement would just underscore how important this agreement is not only to Australia and Britain, but to the United States as well.
So do you think that this review will conclude that it should go ahead?
I cannot judge that. I'm telling you what my hope is and the hope of a lot of American people. This is an important agreement, and working with our allies and partners is so critical, particularly at this juncture.
And of course, you know, unless there can be some resolution to that massive tariff escalation, if we can de-escalate, the global economy suffers, doesn't it? It's not just China and the United States.
You're absolutely correct. And both the OECD and the World Bank now have reduced forecasts for global economic growth this year, largely due to the U.S. tariff policy.
Wendy Cutler, thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Donald Trump says the deal to save a trade truce with China is done. Speaking to reporters on a trip to the theatre, he said the US was rocking on lots more agreements too. The president added he would be willing to extend the deadline for talks with other countries, but didn't think he'd have to.
I don't think we're going to have that necessity. We made a great deal with China. We're very happy with it.
Trump didn't offer more details and said some countries would simply be told what their deal was.
We're dealing with about 15 countries, but as you know, we have about 150 plus, and you can't do that. So we're going to be sending letters out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
The agreement with China came after 2 days of intense talks in London. That deal confirms an earlier agreement hammered out in May, which had seemed under threat over Beijing's curbs on the export of critical rare earth minerals. Those restrictions will now be lifted, with some US measures also eased. But many details remain unclear, and Washington is still imposing a 55% tariff on Chinese goods. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that rate was fixed and unalterable. Speaking earlier in Congress, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Beijing needed to show it was open to fundamental change.
They're in the midst of a real estate downturn. Some may cause a crisis, and they are trying to export their way out of it rather than take domestic measures such as increasing consumption, dealing with banking problems, or dealing with the real estate crisis.
Bessent said the London deal did not mean Washington would lift curbs on the export of cutting-edge chips in return for the supply of rare earths. Market reaction to the agreement was muted, with many investors saying they wanted to see more detail.